This is Chris Gardner of the Houston Roundball Review. I'm going to have another AAC beat writer interview, and this time I'm being joined by Shawn Pastor, who covers the Temple Owls with OwlsDaily. We have never met, so this will be a first for both of us. So, Shawn, thank you very much for joining me. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me on first of all.
Let's get right into it. OwlsDaily. How long have you been there? What's it about? How can folks sign up, join, whatever?
Right. So, well, OwlsDaily is the Temple site on the 247 Sports Network. I started OwlsDaily in 2007. My history so I've been covering Temple since I was in school there. Actually, at the same time as Aaron McKee, since 1989. I kind of went to work for the student paper, and when I finished up there, I started a newsletter called Owl Scoop. Owl Scoop moved onto the internet. Owl Scoop is the rival site. I started that site. After about 10 years, I sold that site and then started OwlsDaily. So I've just continued following Aaron McKee and Temple around, and it keeps me busy in football and basketball season.
Okay, so you cover. My next question: what sports do you cover for Temple?
Yeah, certainly. The focus is mostly football, basketball, and recruiting.
Okay, so you do a little bit more than you do a little bit of everything there. We share kind of a similar path. I started covering basketball in '94, so we're entrepreneurs doing our own thing, and I assume that it was a struggle for you to keep things going and adjusting to non-subscriber base and things like that. Would you agree?
Yeah, certainly. Well, back in the day, I was printing. We had a tabloid newspaper for about 7 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. It was great, and that was its own world. And then we bridged into the internet era, and probably 15 years back. It's so long ago, where sort of print became really difficult for except for certain huge schools where that might still be a big market, and it's been internet only for more than a decade now, and need to now work, have a full-time job and do OwlsDaily on the side, as opposed to the old days when I was younger, no family, no kids, right, on my own. I could just run around and cover Temple. Okay, so let's get into Temple basketball. Give me a recap on last season's team. Did anything surprise you, disappoint you? Yeah, I tell you, I think, the season probably, if you look back, probably a disappointment to everybody, in the sense that, historically, the Temple fan base has extremely high expectations, right? Just born out of 20 years with John Chaney. You were in the NCAA Tournament every year, and you made noise in the NCAA Tournament quite often. That moved on to Fran Dunphy, who continued that, success of getting to the NCAA Tournament mm-hmm. every year. But he could never get to that Sweet 16. It was always an early departure. He only got out of the first round a couple of times. And so, when Aaron Aaron McKee comes in last year as the head coach, for a lot of people around the program, this is sort of this is going to cycle back to the good old days of John Chaney and sort of what he's going to bring in. But Aaron was a rookie coach, and I think we probably should have seen or expected bumps in the road, which is what happened. It was probably a huge learning experience for Aaron. The team itself, even they were in the tournament 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. So they came into last year, and you might recall Shiz Alston was an awesome point guard. Leading scorer for the team, right? And they basically only lost Shiz as the primary guy, and so not a lot of people were talking Temple last year, but I think internally there was thoughts that, hey, we should be right back in the picture. Things started well, but it was a sort of a tough slog through the American. They finished the season, they lost their last 5 games, first losing record in almost 10 years. So, and then the roster has changed over significantly, going from the last season to this season. Again, all of this maybe should have been expected when you're changing over the head coach.
Have you spoken to Aaron? What did Aaron say? Well, the season got cut short in March, obviously. but did he have any sort of season wrap up to discuss the season?
Yeah, he at the end of the season we did catch up a couple of weeks after the aborted trip down to Fort Worth for the tournament, and I think that was essentially similar to his take, that it was a learning experience for everybody, and it's sort of been subsequent to all of that the roster has changed over so much. A number of players left early. He's brought in a couple of transfers, several freshmen, and he's got another recruiting class going this year. And in the interim, now the last 6 months, it's been obviously the world's changed, and we've talked with Aaron one time, and it was sort of about broader topics, right, in the world rather than the specifics to his team.
If you can, give me your breakdown of this year's roster.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it starts, you got to look at last year's roster. People probably remember, hey, Quentin Rose was a really, great player, potential pro, and he's moved on. Nate Pierre-Louis was a junior last year, but he graduated in 3 years, and he decided to jump into the pros too. He had a younger brother, Josh Pierre-Louis, who was a freshman on last year's team, came in with super high expectations and kind of really just never slowed down. You never sort of, you come into high school and you think he's a great athlete and you're just, he's going to make a splash, and he just never quite fit. And when Nate left, I believe a day or two later, Josh decides to transfer as well. And then they had a backup shooting guard last year, Monty Scott, who had come in as a transfer. He stuck around 1 year. Well, actually 2 years, right? He sat out. So he plays 1 year and he transfers out. He goes to Portland State. Josh Pierre-Louis transfers to UCSB. Justin Hamilton, a big man who was probably the 8th, 9th guy in the rotation last year, he transfers to Kent State. I think that shows you all three of these guys kind of drop down a level, looking to, maybe probably find a better fit. So as a result, right, between you're losing 3 seniors with Quentin Rose, Alani Moore, who was the point guard, Damian Moore, who was the backup center, then you're losing 3 transfers. You've lost half the roster. So then you got this year, you've really only got 3 experienced guys coming back. The seniors are J.P. Moorman and Dre Perry, both probably at the small and the power forward positions, though they're really both, small forward types. And Jake Forrester, who came in last year from Indiana, he's back. A little bit of an undersized guy at center, an energy guy, probably, really needs to bulk up and work on some of his kind of pivot skills this offseason. He'll be sort of a key guy to, if they're going to do something this year, he's going to have taken a big step. But it's really those 3 are all of you got, and then they're bringing in a freshman class of 4 freshmen who, they're going to have to play, some of them. And then they've got 2 transfers. Khalif Battle transferred in from Butler. Sage Tolbert transferred in from Southeast Missouri State. He's a sort of similar to Jake Forrester, a big forward. Didn't put up big numbers at Southeast Missouri State, which is kind of at the lower rung of, they play in the Ohio Valley, right? The Ohio Valley is kind of like Murray State, Belmont, and then a bunch of sort of questionable teams. Right. Yes. Yeah, so he played there, and it was 7 or 8 points and 7 or 8 rebounds a game. An energy guy. I don't know. We'll see how that translates. Is he going to develop into someone who can contribute? And Caleb Battle, who's from the Philadelphia area, from the Trenton area, he's coming in at shooting guard. Now, the 2 of them are still waiting at this point, as we sit here today, to see if they might get waivers to be able to play this year. Okay. Right. So if that comes through, then you got a full roster, and we'll see what they can do. If the waivers aren't granted, then again, you're back to the 3 guys I mentioned before, and then several freshmen who, we'll see what they can do. And I should add, there were two other guards who were hurt last year. Ty Strickland, a point guard, Rodney Strickland's son.
Okay.
Yeah, he transferred in from Wisconsin, sat out last year. Good chance he would have been the starting point guard this year. He just had shoulder surgery. No idea yet whether or when he'll come back. Apparently, he will be back at some point this season, right? Assuming we get into a season.
Yes.
But not sure, when. And then Damian Dunn redshirted last year as a freshman. He prior to last season starting, he sort of made a better first impression, say, than Josh Pierre-Louis he could play either guard position. Damian Dunn, he broke his foot last year late in the summer. Came back, played one game at Tulsa, tried to come back after, they brought him back as slowly as possible through November and December. Finally, first week of January, they said, okay, we're going to give it a shot. He played a game at Tulsa, a couple days later, the foot didn't feel right. And so he pretty much shut it down for the season. He's the closest thing that they have to an experienced guy in the backcourt right now. So that's going to make for, an interesting start.
Saying all that, the roster turnover and the young guys coming in, what are your expectations and what are the fans' expectations of this year's team?
Yeah, I think the fan, I tell you, I can't even guess. The fan base is kind of, they're a great, at least on my my OwlsDaily message boards and such. They're ready to sort of, okay, we might have to swallow it this year, and it could be a tough year. I mean, it's just, you look at the roster, and it's hard to imagine these guys having some kind of a immediate success. It'll be a building process throughout the season. There's already a lot of focus on this current recruiting class. Aaron has picked up a couple of commitments, which people are really high on, 3-star type guys from around Philly. Okay. Where, that's real. That was a big that's another thing that was sort of a major program thing for Temple is, John Chaney, to some degree, back in the day, could get the kids he wanted out of Philly. That changed over the course of Fran Dunphy's, the Philly recruiting scene changed. It's a situation now where most of the top kids in Philly leave, head down to, you name it, ACC and head out. And Temple, and even in Aaron's first recruiting class, he's got no kids from the Philly area. And so that's been a big focus. Can he make that connection back with the folks in the city and get that recruiting pipeline going again? So he's picked up a couple kids that for next year, people kind of already have that on their mind. And I think for this year, it's, hope for the best. And I mean, I'm not going to assume anything as fans are fans, but if this second year for Aaron does not go well, will his seat get warmer going into his third year? Yeah, I don't think so. Okay. Aaron is right. He's a Philadelphia basketball legend. He's the embodiment of kid from Philly, from extremely disadvantaged background, who John Chaney brought into Temple, who was a tremendous success at Temple, who won, in the tournament, went to the Final Eight, had battles against, Chris Webber in Michigan and those guys, memorable time, and then was, even just as big a success in the NBA with the Sixers. So with all of that, that's, that in itself is a ton of rope, in the sense that he's given time to, to learn what he needs to do and see if he can get the job done. And not to mention sort of, the financial constraints that now exist across the entire college athletic world, right? There's talk how in college football, you're not going to see firings this year, and it'll carry on in basketball because these schools can't afford to be paying multiple coaches. But Aaron wouldn't be. Either way, he's going to be given time at Temple to try and make it work. Okay, what is your perception of the conference as a basketball conference? It's boy, the AAC. I think it's just been snake bitten since year one. And it's right. It's such a change this year because now UConn has left the league, and UConn is, right. Their fan base up there felt like the American damaged our program.
Mm-hmm.
We entered this league and we were in the Big East, which was 8 to 10 tournament teams every year. And we came in here and we won the national championship the first year in the American. And now look what happened. Now we've got to go out to, I don't want to name a particular place, but right, we've got to go out to this school or that school or that school, which doesn't have the following, fan base, anything we have, and it damages us. When, the reality might have been, it was UConn's role to be that lead dog in this league. And they're the ones who kind of struggled so badly and became a sort of they couldn't go to Houston and win. They couldn't go to, you name it. They couldn't go on the road to Tulsa for years and win a game. That's not on anybody else but them. So now it's funny. So they've moved out, and that's clearly one of the marquee teams. And now all the marquee teams are still now Memphis and Houston and Cincinnati. So it's a question of what other programs can sort of hit that consistent marquee level that, certainly Kelvin Sampson and at Cincinnati, that they've been able to maintain while, the middle and the bottom of the league have their ups and downs.
Do Temple fans attend the home games to see U of H, Memphis, Cincinnati, or they just tune out the conference?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say tune out. I think, Temple fans, right, it's still a pro market where the Sixers are the team in the market, and you've got Villanova down the street. So if you're the local college basketball fan who isn't aligned with a particular Big Five school, you're not a Villanova alum or a Temple alum or a St. Joe's alum, you're just a Philadelphia, that's Villanova is where all the attention goes. And so Temple fans, again, they all yearn for the good old days, right? When the Liacouras Center opened 20 years ago. Prior to that, they played in a little 4,000 seat gym on campus. They moved there, and it was a big deal for a decade. And it's over the course, largely of Fran Dunphy's tenure as the head coach. Expectations were not met, and so fans lose interest to some degree. There are those who, yearn for the days in the Atlantic 10. Not that the Atlantic 10 had, that many thrilling sort of, Temple dominated that league, right? Temple and Xavier were at the top of that league for the last 10 years, certainly of before Temple moved on and Xavier moved on. So I wouldn't say Temple's sort of the fan base, their opinion or their reaction to the American is probably no different than the A10. They'll show up when the team starts, winning a lot again, bring back the good old days, bringing back the Cheney crew from back then. But so certainly, yeah, with right, UConn was one of the teams that did have that interest. So that's one less sort of marquee opponent on the schedule. They certainly recognize the success that Houston has had, and they, respect these other teams that come in, whether it be Cincinnati, Tulsa. Tulsa has won about 80% of the games against Temple since Temple joined the league. But the fact that they respect those teams and understand that we're in for a tough day doesn't necessarily mean they want to show up, until they see W's again.
You touched on it moments ago, and being a Philly guy, I have to ask you because I've tried for years to get the local teams in Houston to play a tournament type, a city type battle. Just describe the Big Five and what it means to Philly.
Yeah, it's the history is, without sort of match. People go talk, the Big Five went back to the 1950s, and the heyday was probably the 60s and the 70s, when all of the five teams in the city, Temple, Villanova, St. Joe, Penn, and LaSalle, they all played their games at the Palestra, which has an amazing, it's amazingly loud. It's an amazing atmosphere, and it's a 50-50 split every game between the two fan bases. So you can just imagine every game. I mean, it just it grew over decades. Things changed over the years. The game is still super meaningful to, Temple still at this point, they're playing, say, LaSalle and St. Joe's as non-conference games, and Penn, and they've continued. And those continue to be Villanova is obviously going to be a sellout. That's the biggest game of every other year when they come into the Liacouras Center. Those other games are still, three of the biggest games of the year. Even if Temple now has the expectation that we've moved on from the A-10, we should be beating St. Joe and LaSalle and Penn every time. It's still, there's, the older fan base still remembers, and it's just, it is incredible, even if it doesn't mean as much as it did, back in the day.
And I'm once again speaking with Shawn Pastor of OwlsDaily. How can folks subscribe to OwlsDaily or follow you on Twitter?
Yeah, so on Twitter, I'm at Temple OwlsDaily. On Facebook, we're at Temple OwlsDaily. And the website is owlsdaily.com. Again, it's the Temple site on the 247 Sports Network, going strong after all these years.
What were your thoughts on Wednesday's ACC proposal of every team making the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, gosh. I guess first thought is, and I saw this, sort of brought about, a number of the initial reactions are, you already do have, the tournament is already open to everybody because every league has a league tournament. And so that league tournament is everybody's pathway into the NCAA tournament. So why build it out? I can't even begin to think about the logistics of it.
Agreed.
Yeah. And I get, maybe to some degree, I guess, the logistic, just as we saw last year, it was all of the league tournaments that were canceled right ahead of the NCAA tournament cancellation. And the logistics of all those league tournaments are a question mark again this year. There's God knows how we're going to get this season, how it's going to work, right? How teams are going to play. Are they going to travel to certain places? Are there going to be bubble situations and non-conference? But however that works out, right? Even when you get into conference season, these conferences, I think, can govern themselves and figure it out the same way that the American and the SEC and the Big 12 and so forth are trying to do it in football. At least within your conference, you can figure out your conference schedule, try to make it work. You can, when we get to games that need to be postponed and rescheduled, you can make it work within the league. But even having said all that, when it comes to conference tournament time next March, maybe the conference tournaments are not, maybe they're a logistic impossibility, right? And even if you can put them together, what kind of crowds are you going to be able to draw next March for? Who knows? So maybe part of that whole idea is, if conference tournaments are a big question mark, then maybe the NCAA tournament having 350 teams or so is the way to go. But I'll leave that to them to figure it out, and I'll. If it really did come together, I could weigh in on it then.
Yeah, it sounds like Dan Gavitt has kind of poured cold water on the idea. So I was glad to hear that, because logistics-wise, cost-wise, all kinds of other factors, and of course you got to do it for the women's tournament too. So I don't see that happening. It doesn't sound like it's going to happen. It was fun for discussion for a day, and I think it was dying a quick death. But John Rothstein, CBS Sports, has reported that the AAC is considering going to a 20-game conference schedule where everybody plays each other twice. So what are your thoughts on that? And I'm not sure if it's just for this season or if it's going forward, this season and then going forward.
Yeah, sure. I mean, certainly the fact that say the Big Ten, right, they're already doing that, and the other leagues are top leagues are moving in that direction. Even some lesser leagues, I think, have moved towards increasing the number of conference games. So, under that scenario, in all likelihood, it reduces the number of quality non-conference games that, say, the American can put together. Because if I'm Michigan State, if I'm Duke, and I've got 2 fewer non-conference games that I can schedule, and I'm going to schedule, X number of guarantee type home games, then how many chances do the teams in the American are they going to get to schedule really meaningful non-conference games? And so if that whole avenue is sort of reduced, then it probably makes sense to look at playing more league games. As for how this affects the net rankings, right? They can do the math on that and figure out if it probably helps. And I think I'm sure that's part of their decision making, right? Everything that the league does schedule wise is with the improving teams' chances of getting at-large bids in mind. So if the math leads that way, then it does make sense as well.
And I would think it would kind of force the mid to lower teams in the conference. They have to get better, because if you're playing the lower tier teams who have not been good out of conference, in conference for a few years, 2 wins over them is not a benefit. So that means you really have to have the rest of the conference step up their game and improve their records and performance for it to benefit 8, 9, the majority of teams in the conference. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think the American, it's a league where there are certain schools that have very different scheduling philosophies.
Yes, for sure.
There are teams that will line up 5 or 6, teams in that 300 ranking or below, either because financially they want to get these home games in, or for whatever reason. And then there's other teams that look to schedule more power when they can. So I don't know. You can't control how the individual schools, within the league, how they need to approach sort of their business end of it. So again, it's sort of in that vein. Having more conference games kind of takes care of some of that.
And I do wonder what some coaches would think about it, because more conference games will take away your chance at elite non-conference matchups. So some coaches might not like that, because it lowers their chances of playing a quality elite team or going to a quality tournament. So, I mean, it's good and bad both ways. I can see the argument for it. I also think that with the conference going to the ESPN Plus platform, it's a chance for them to have more games on ESPN Plus for content purposes too. How about that?
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. And, when it comes to non-conference games, so much of, 3 out of those, whatever it might be, 3 out of those 9 or 10 games or 11 games are a tournament anyway, these neutral site tournaments. That's mostly when, you don't see the power teams wanting to go on the road to some certain teams in the American,
right?
Period. Unless there's longstanding relationships like Temple Villanova. Kelvin Sampson at Houston is typically every year he gets to plug in a couple of major opponents home and away. And Cincinnati has Ohio State, things like that they play regularly. But there's other teams that just aren't going to, even now, can't get major teams to come in. And so you end up playing these, the tournament, whether it be Hawaii, the early season tournaments that are everywhere. And that's always a moving target. I don't know what the relationship will be between conference schedules changing and then non-conference schedules shrinking a little bit, and the impact on those tournaments, the neutral site tournaments.
Shawn, we're almost done. Thank you very much for taking time to talk to me. Got to ask you, have you been impacted, you, family, friends, been impacted by the pandemic, by coronavirus, COVID-19?
Gosh, so I've been okay. We've been okay here. Family's okay.
Good.
my wife and I both have been working from home now for 6 months. My kids are back in school as of this week. So, and I've got 2 older kids at college. Neither of them chose to go to Temple. But they're both okay, and they both we're about 3 weeks in now, and neither of their colleges have closed. They haven't been sent home. There hasn't been outbreaks where they are, as we've seen at other schools. So I've been okay so far, and certainly lucky to be in that situation.
Glad to hear that. What are your thoughts on Kelvin Sampson and the Houston program?
Kelvin, he's reached the point where, and it's really a similar point to where Temple when John Chaney was there, right? John Chaney was there, and he would have NBA players like Aaron McKee and Eddie Jones, and then they graduated. Mm-hmm. And you just knew that whoever he has coming that hasn't played, he's got guys coming in who are going to be able to keep it at that level. And that's where Kelvin Sampson is. You look at the roster, and every year, they've lost a couple of years ago. Oh, what are they going to do without Rob Gray? How are they going to fill in with the losses from last year? And so it's they got kids leave early unexpectedly, mm-hmm. and he's still got guys waiting. He's got the kid he recruited, who then Mike Davis's son, right? Who he had come into Houston, who then went to
Detroit,
mm-hmm. Right? I mean, imagine if he had that kid too. So he's got, and these guys aren't necessarily, 5 stars, 4 stars, but he lines up the right guys, and you just have, he's going to line them up every year. And, so to me, they're probably the favorite in this league every year until Penny wins the league.
Okay. Is there, one more thing. I ask everybody this question. In your opinion, how many teams from the conference reached the NCAA tournament?
I need your consent on a few items to continue.
Oh, that's a good question. And that's probably a hard question this year. Again, Houston's in, I think, as an automatic now every year. Memphis is probably, the longer, Penny's he's going to recruit at this level, and presumably he's going to keep it at this level. There's no reason to think he won't. And, some might have thought they sort of might have underachieved to some degree. As the years go by, they're going to start to, meet the level of expectation and exceed it, because he's just going to get better as a coach. So they are going to, I think you have to mark them down as an NCAA tournament team. Cincinnati is a good question mark. Because that's a significant changeover. That was an entire Mick Cronin world.
Yes,
that he ended off, right, and they were right there where they needed to be last year. But they'll be sort of the team to watch. Do they maintain that level where the league is a 3-bid league? At least every season.
All right.
So I'll say it's hard to say beyond 3. SMU and Temple and I don't know where, say, USF, right? They were a hot early thought last year until Yetna gets hurt. And, Johnny Dawkins, clearly knows what he's doing. But all those guys, are these NCAA tournament teams, or is there so much parity that, there's 3 at the top and then everybody else is kind of pushing towards that 500 level? That's just sort of what happens from the infighting. So that's where I'm landing at that number now.
Where would you put Wichita State?
Yeah, well, gosh, that's a total rebuild, right? But and Greg Marshall, right? You would assume he knows what he's doing too. That's why what happened last year with everybody leaving was such a shock, right? I would have said they're a tournament team, but you can't say that when he completely overhauls the entire roster.
So right now,
again, that gets back to it's like it's a oddly snake-bitten league at times, which it's inexplicable, right? Some people point to, well, it's a football league, and that's what happens because it's a football-oriented league, and so many schools are more focused on football, that you just by nature, basketball isn't as successful as you would hope. But I don't know. It's that was such an odd sort of development out at Wichita. Hard to fathom then as a tournament team this season.
All right, Shawn. Thank you for your time. Is there anything you want to mention, say, touch on that I haven't asked and we haven't talked about?
Well, that's a good question. Nothing comes to mind. I just let's hope we have a season.
Okay.
Right.
One question. One question for that. If we do have a season, and if we do have a conference tournament in Fort Worth, will you be there?
I will be there. I was on I covered Temple, but I now live in New York. I was on the subway on the way to LaGuardia last year on the morning of the first day of the tournament last year in Fort Worth, when the message came through. Right, I think the night before the news had come out, no fans, and I just double checked. Media was still going to be there, so I was on my way when it got canceled. So I'll certainly be there. I hope this year, right? We'll see when the schedule comes out. At this point, I've been to every venue in the league except for the Fertitta Center, and haven't been down to USF. But I've over the last couple of years managed to hit every other venue. So hope to be. I've been to the stadium for a couple of football games down there. Saw the entire construction project when it was happening. Outside in Houston, but haven't got to go to a game. I think the Temple played Houston and Tulane back to back 2 years back, and I was planning to go, and then plans got changed relatively late. So I'm hoping to fill out the card this year with those 2 games. That's my goal.
Okay, well, if it's a 20-game conference schedule, everybody will play everybody home and road. So if that happens, I'll see you at Fertitta Center. So
I will be there.
Look forward to that. Shawn Pastor, thank you very much for taking time to speak to me. And one more time, remind folks how they can find you on the internet.
Yep. So it's OwlsDaily, OwlsDaily.com. You can Twitter. I'm at Temple OwlsDaily, and also on Facebook at Temple OwlsDaily. We've always got a subscription deal going. If you're, we try to cover the American to some degree, even beyond Temple. So, and always good chit chat going on our message boards.
All right, Shawn. Thank you very much for your time. You take care.
Thanks.